Hey everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of 2 Pixels Off. I'm Mike Janda and I'm here with my cohort, Brad Hussey, the Huss Dog, the Hussinator, the Hoser from Canada.
How's it going, Mike?
Good, how are you?
Welcome to 2 Pixels Off, a podcast for creative entrepreneurs.
Good, man, good.
Good.
Ready to dig in.
For those of you listening, we haven't recorded for a couple weeks. So Brad and I just got on. I can't believe it's been a couple weeks. Did we record last week?
No, it's been 2 weeks. It feels like a long time.
Wow, that's crazy. It does feel like a long time because we were like racking up the record episodes, getting ahead on schedule, which we still are, which always feels good on these kinds of things.
Absolutely.
So what have you done the last couple weeks? Anything good happen for you?
Yeah, well, the weather's been making a turn for the better up my way here in Alberta, Canada. So I've been enjoying that. We just wrapped up Little League baseball season. I was coaching my son's Little League. And so that's been tons of fun. It's always nice to do that. And at the time of this recording, obviously when it comes out, it'll be post event, but I'm preparing for Config 2024, the Figma conference in San Francisco. So just gearing up, just being prepared and making sure I got what I need and looking forward to it.
Yeah, when do you go for that? Is that next week?
Next week.
Wow.
Yeah, it'll be next Monday, next Tuesday.
Good. Okay, well, we'll love the digest of that when you come
back.
Okay, shout out to Wix Studio for making our podcast possible. We're thankful to them. Check out wixstudio.com, a no-code website builder that is a lot more than just a no-code website builder. It really is a tool that can help you run your entire online business, your entire creative business for doing websites for clients. There's just so many tools built into it. And then it's really powerful to help you create effective websites for your clients. Websites that work, websites that generate leads, that capture the leads and put them into the system and let you do your marketing through that. All your clients will be empowered using that tool. So shout out to Wix Studio. Thank you. And if you have not left a review for 2 Pixels Off on your favorite podcast platform, please do that because those help the show so much. Okay, Brad, today we are going to dig into critiquing design. Critiquing design. Oh, he's opening his soda. Which one do you have now? You got bubbly?
You know what? It's the AHA. You ever hear that one?
No, I don't know AHA, but I have Polar Premium Seltzer.
And what's that flavor? Is that like orange? Orange and
vanilla. Yeah,
what?
Orange vanilla.
Nice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I got myself, I'm looking at the French side. Everything here in Canada is bilingual, so we got extra reading. Pineapple and passion fruit, or in French, it would be ananas, fruit de la passion. I don't know. Yeah, that's a lot of French words.
Okay, let me shout out something before we dig into critiquing design. I bought my new seltzer water yesterday, and I was price motivated. I looked at, they had all the brands. They had Waterloo, they had Bubbly, they had LaCroix, they had this Polar Premium whatever brand, they had Liquid Death, and they had all these things. And I looked for the one that was on sale. I was not brand motivated to buy. I was price motivated to buy. And these were 2 cases for $5 or something. So $2.50 per case. Yeah. Good.
How much?
Good deal.
Per case?
$2.50 per case of 8. Yeah.
No way. Okay. Can I tell you something?
It's pretty good. Yeah, tell me.
The reason why we have this one right now and not the bubbly is because my wife was picking up some groceries and she was like, I got these ones, the AHA ones, because they were cheaper than the bubbly ones at the store. And the reason why, so price motivation here, being like this was cheaper. Normally we just get bubbly because I guess it's not that big of a deal price wise, but for a case of 12, for a case of
probably 8. Does it come with 8?
8. What is it? What is the, maybe are the cases different? Maybe. I think it was 12, 36, 9, 12. I think it was a 12 pack. It was like something ridiculous. It was like $10 or something like that.
Really?
It's insane for water.
Yeah.
For literal carbonated water. That's the difference,
what are we
I think.
doing?
What are we doing, right?
Right?
And I think that might be the difference between certain areas in the United States and Canada. Like we're isolated to think like that's a normal. We're like, oh, we'll pay $12 for water.
Yeah.
And you're like, I paid $5 for 2 cases.
Yeah.
That's nuts. I got to drive down to Montana to buy bubbly and bring it over the border.
Yes. And if you hit Costco, you'll get it even cheaper. They do like 36 cans, and one of the brands will be on sale for like $6.99 or something like that. So
crazy.
Yeah. But I didn't go to Costco and do that yesterday. All right. What are we even talking about here? What are we talking about?
I'm not sure.
I think it was just, as I was thinking, we've talked a lot about pricing and buyer decision making and stuff. And what are the variables that people consider when they're making purchase decisions? And so I thought I'd just shout out the fact that I was really price motivated.
Yeah.
To me, all of these taste at the same level of mediocrity. That's where they taste. They're all fine. I don't really notice the difference between Polar Ice and Bubbly and Waterloo and whatever other brands. And so for me, I go in and I'm price motivated because the quality or the product itself didn't have a differentiator between one brand and the other. You can get some crappy flavors. Like I avoid the crappy, crazy flavors, and I stick with your orange and your black cherry and your strawberry, kind of your more mainstream ones that usually every brand's going to have their version of that flavor.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty much the same. So if there's no other differentiator, where do we go? We pick the cheapest one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of me too, one of the things, and I think I can tie this into our topic today, is when I'm looking and you have a bunch of same product offerings, whether it's carbonated water or an outdoor lifestyle brand or a website of some sort, a service offering. Like if there's lots of same on offer and the outcome is essentially the same and the experience is essentially the same, of course we're going to look to price. If it's a better deal, then that's what it's going to boil down to. But also for me, sometimes or a lot of the times, if the budget version design doesn't look right and something's off, I'll avoid it. Even if I'm like, that's cheaper, that's a better deal. Because to me, the design, the packaging, how it's presenting itself says something about the product. And if they can't put effort or they don't know what they're doing in terms of presenting it, then I don't trust what the product itself is, regardless of it being cheap. If it was cheap and it looked bad, I would go, I know why it's cheap, because it looks bad and it probably tastes bad or feels bad or doesn't get me what I need. It's just, I get what I pay for. So I'll go to the next one and go, what looks great? I love how Bubbly's packaging and design looks. The design of certain brands look great. I think this one to me is a little bit over the top, but maybe they're doing that to differentiate themselves from Bubbly, which is a very clean, cute, kind of literally bubbly style. Not monochromatic, but one single color, one logo, slight differentiation on if it's like a happy face or a mustache face or whatever it is. So for me, the design and how it presents itself really matters. And if it looks like they're off kilter or they don't know the standards or the conventions of what I'm about to buy, then I will typically avoid it, even if the price is low. Yeah. So I think today we can maybe tie that in. Go ahead. Yeah. My example of that is there's Truvia. Do you ever get stevia sweetener? So there's a brand called sweetener. Yeah. There's a brand called Truvia that has I love their freaking packaging. I love the way the box opens. They've got green and white and it looks so sick. It looks so good. I buy Truvia because I love their packaging. I don't buy the 100% stevia in the raw or whatever the more generic looking brand is on that. And so I am packaging motivated or brand motivated on some things. I'm not sure why I'm not on the water brands, because I drink it all day long because it's a little more fun than drinking still water. I don't know why. There is one brand that I love
that I usually don't splurge on, and it's the Liquid Death brand. Do you know that brand? It's a taller can. It looks like it's, you're holding a cool beer or something. It's got cool styling, and the design. It's really cool and edgy, and it's got its own thing. They differentiated, and they're creating this brand more around it feels more, X Games kind of a vibe. Like this is what the cool people are going to be drinking if they were drinking carbonated water. Yeah. So that one I like, but it's so much more expensive that I don't find myself being drawn to it to buy it when I know that the product overall is largely the same.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does that tell us about, design and our expectations of design? And, like we're critiquing these different cans of carbonated water, but we can apply that to, like, there are designers who sit probably in Illustrator or Photoshop or Figma or whatever, tool they use to do packaging design, front-facing consumer packaging design, CPG, consumer packaging.
Yeah.
There's a name for it. Yeah. There's designers like you and I, and their medium and their end result are like aluminum cans, whereas ours might be, a website or a web app or something along those lines, a digital experience. So you can critique that. So what would you say, maybe we can dive into kind of a standardized process of what it means to critique a professional design that's specifically, in our realm, typically a website, web experience.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people listening to this probably are brand designers and stuff too. I think we probably have a wide variety of different types of creatives that are following this show. We really do talk
product designers,
to creative. Yeah. There's a lot. UX designers, when we say web design, there's UX designers, there's UI designers, there's front end developers that are / designers. I think there's such a wide variety of these people that would be bundled into this web design bucket. But critiquing design really is the same, independent of the platform that you are designing on. It doesn't matter if it's a logo or a website or a can for your carbonated water. It doesn't matter. The critiquing formula is still the same. So like you introduced, Brad, let's talk about the critiquing formula for design. And I break down critiquing into 3 buckets. The first one is the big picture stuff, which we'll talk about first. And then the broad strokes, some of those more broad category things. And then we get into the nitty gritty category, which is like typography and typos and things. We'll talk about that last. But the big picture stuff is the most important thing about a design that you're creating for anything. It is the most important thing. All the other stuff is really becomes easy after you get to a certain level of ability in your craft. You can spot a typo. You have spell checkers that are fixing that stuff for you. You have spell checkers on the fly while you're writing something, and it's automatically correcting it for you now. So these things that used to take proofers and critiquers had to be super detail oriented to watch for stuff. A lot of that's done manually now, but this broad stroke stuff or this big picture stuff is the stuff that is really still needs to be human centered. If we talk about AI is not going to be able to look at a design and tell you on these big picture things if it is checking the box or not. So let's go into that list of stuff. These are the big picture items that you want to look for when you're critiquing design. What's one of those first ones, Brad, that you want to chat about?
Yeah, that I think at the very top of that list is going to be the objective, the primary goal of the design. What is its primary objective? Is it trying to sell something? Is it trying to communicate a message? Is it trying to tell a story? And does the design accomplish that objective? Or if you haven't designed anything yet, like, so this is if you're looking at it, critiquing it, but if you haven't designed yet, and maybe you're just in the exploratory phase, discovery phase, understand what the objective is first, because then you could just go down that path first before going down a direction and then retroactively going, I don't think this achieves our objective.
Yeah.
This is
but it sure looks pretty.
It
sure looks pretty.
Yeah.
The colors are really good. This is what designers do. They're like, oh, the colors are so good. And look at my hierarchy of my information. And look at this picture I found, without ever looking at what is the purpose of this whole thing. I think it's so important. I did that for a long time, man. I was a designer, an aesthetic designer. And it wasn't until later that I started to capture this idea of, wait a second, what are we even trying to accomplish here?
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, exactly.
I do a thing, Brad. I don't know if you do this, but I critique everything I see when I'm looking at freaking magazine. I'm looking at these cans, like what we're talking about. I'm in the grocery store. I'm critiquing the packaging design. I'm at a restaurant. I'm critiquing the menu. I'm driving on the freeway. I'm critiquing the billboards all the time. And I think there's an interesting game that people could play along with this podcast is start looking for these things. So you're driving down, you're seeing the billboards on your way to work. What is the objective of this design? What's the objective of that design? What are they trying to accomplish? And am I, as the recipient of the design, am I understanding their objective? And start critiquing design that way. It can polish up your own personal skills in seeing and thinking objective first on creating design.
Yeah. So then the next, once you've done that, if you can identify that, and that's a sign of a good design. If you go, I think I can understand the objective here quickly. Because that's the thing is you don't want to go through it and then take some time and then go, like it's not an art piece where you're trying to understand its context and the worldview of the creator, in the 1700s. You're like, no. You can tell pretty quickly, like within a few seconds, I think I know the objective here. Or I have no clue. So that's a good litmus test. I'll give you another one here. After that is the primary action. So will the viewer, the person who's experiencing the design, know what action to take next? And specifically, like what's the first thing that they should do? Is it very clear? Do they know what their step 2 is? They landed on the site, or they look at the product or whatever it is. Do they know what the exact next step is? Or if they are, let me use this for example again. I'm just pulling up this can. I don't know if we could tie it into a website, but I'm looking at the packaging here. I can tell pretty quickly it's carbonated water. It says very clearly what it is. Now, if I turn it around and I want to look at the nutrition facts, I'm pretty sure you guys in the States have everything's like mandated to have nutrition facts. Yeah. So, like you want to look at that, and the information design of those are universal. Yeah. And so I can kind of glance and get the information quickly. I can go, what are the calories in this? What's the fat? Is there any protein, sodium content? Like I can find out pretty quickly. Bubbly water, it's pretty easy to find out. It's all 0. But you're looking at
nothing in this. What are we buying this for, man?
Just air in water.
We get a cool can that we throw away. Hopefully recycling.
Exactly. Hopefully, yeah. So that's the action. What's the action? The next step in each segment of the design experience. Do they know? Is it a call? Is it a click? Is it to read and gather a key piece of information? Is it to visit something? What is that key action that they ought to take?
You glossed over something that I want to highlight that I think is super important, that you said in each segment of the design. So when we take websites and you have like a hero section on top, there is an action that you want the user to take in the hero section. But as you scroll down, that next module on the website may have a totally different action that you want the user to take. And it can be the same in like a brochure. On the cover of the brochure, a trifold brochure, what is the action you want them to take? Maybe it's to call a number right from the cover. Or maybe it's just to open the brochure to get into the guts of the inside. But you have to have a defined action. And then when it's open, there may be another action that's different from the action on the cover that you want somebody to take. So I think that's such an important thing, understanding that there should be a primary objective for the entire piece that you're designing, but there can be micro objectives in every little segment of a design.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to understand and define that, it's important. And if you're critiquing, if you're listening to this, driving, working, whatever it is, walking, at the gym, there's design everywhere, whether it's physical design, product design, physical, mechanical design, or it's, it's a digital information. It's everywhere. Look at the thing. And if you can understand the objective, what's the action? Is there a clear action? Is it obscure? Is it very clear? See if you can identify that. Now, this is one that I think is another one that's important, is how much it matches the brand that's putting the design out there. So is it on brand? Is the client's expectations of that brand is it going to be consistent? Like if a well-known brand put out a product that just didn't match, there would be kind of a dissonance there, and not a good one, where the person experiencing it would be like, wait a minute, that's not an Apple Apple did that? No, that's a scam, or that's something's wrong, or that's a knockoff, right? And the same thing goes for your website or your brand. If people know this brand and you put out something like a web experience and it doesn't match your brand, that's going to be problematic. That's going to create dissonance, unless it's intentional, like it's an offshoot seasonal thing where you're like a clothing company and you put out like your kids, your summertime seasonal kids line, and it's going to be different than their more refined, adult vacation brand or something like that. If Tommy Bahama put out a kids line and it's more cute, that's different. But it still matches the brand. It's just an extension of it. So making sure that matches the brand, the expectations don't disrupt what the user or the viewer is experiencing.
Yeah. Some of these brands are so tightly managed, and I'll just give you two examples that I think are two of the greatest brands that have ever been created: the Coca-Cola brand and the McDonald's brand. Now, you have these global brands that people in South America are designing for, people in India are designing for, people in the United States and Canada, people all over Europe are doing design work for these global brands. And they have to have brand consistency somehow. Well, the way that it's done is through these super tight style guides that go down to the level of color matching swatches for print. Like you take the Coca-Cola packaging for a box of soda and you print it in Argentina, and the reds cannot be off from the reds that are printed in the United States on a different kind of press. It has to be so tightly managed. And I think it's a piece of the critique that we need to pay attention to when we're looking at design work, making sure that we're staying true to the original real brand that we're designing for. Those are just a couple examples. I don't know how they do it, to be honest. I mean, the consistency of those brands, those two brands especially, across everywhere that I've traveled, because you see them everywhere that you go. Those two brands are in every freaking country pretty much everywhere. And the brand consistency is unbelievable on those two things, for having as many products in the hands of people as they do. It's amazing.
It is. It's very impressive. It's very impressive.
Well, let's go to the next one. Oh, you want to go to the next one? You go to the next one.
I'm on a roll here.
Hey, go for it, man. I'm excited.
How about I go
I'll just
through the
provide
big
color
picture?
Commentary.
Yeah, you just had the color commentary. I'll give you the big pictures, and then you take us through some of those broad strokes. Then when you drill down a little further.
Okay.
Now, this is an extension, I think, from the brand match and the brand expectations. It's the target audience match and the expectations of the target audience. So will this design resonate with the target audience or the persona of that, who's meant to experience that design, that product? Mm-hmm. So keeping that in mind, I mentioned Tommy Bahama before, they know their target audience. They know who's buying their clothing. If they put out a new site or a landing page or a promotion, a seasonal promotion, and it doesn't, say it matches the brand, it checks off objective, the actions are clear in the brand match, but something's off with the target audience. It's like targeting somebody else or a different demographic. And it's like if Tommy Bahama started like really leaning into Gen Z or Gen Z, like, young adults, it just wouldn't match up, because then these like younger adults or these, older kids, they would be like, what is this? This is not, this is not our thing. It's not our style. And Tommy Bahama, the match, the target audience of Tommy Bahama would be like, what is this? Like, I'm not going to buy that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go to my wine tour wearing that, like whatever you're putting out here or whatever this is. Like, it's just like, there's dissonance there. That's not good. So you want to make sure that does the target audience match? Does the design resonate with the target audience? Now you need to understand the target audience. That could be another broad stroke. That's
a big one.
Who's the target audience? And does it, that would be like the first, who's the target audience here? Can I infer that from the design?
Yeah.
And does it match that target audience, of what they're putting out there? So that would be another big one.
I think it's a great one.
Big picture.
It's one of the ones that, every marketing strategy, design, UX strategy, all of these things all start with the user in mind. Who is the person that is going to interact with this piece of design? And knowing that, you have to design to that customer. I looked up while you were talking brands like Tommy Bahama, 21 brands like Tommy Bahama. I found a few articles, but I'm going to shout out a few, because this is a strategy you can do to say to yourself, is this going to resonate with the target audience? A lot of times we can look at other brands that target that same audience and see how they are marketing their wares, so that we can make sure that we are finding some consistency in the overall marketing that people are seeing in that industry. So some of the ones that are like Tommy Bahama on this list that I want to shout out, Nautica is one. J. Crew, I think, is Tommy Bahama-esque. You've got Urban Outfitters, a lot of Tommy Bahama-esque stuff at Urban Outfitters. American Eagle Outfitters, another one that has Tommy Bahama-esque things. And there are all kinds of other ones in here that I don't think are as close a match, like Polo, Ralph Lauren, Levi's. I don't think that these hit the number. Brooks Brothers, I don't see that as Tommy Bahama-esque. Banana Republic, a little more Tommy Bahama-esque, perhaps. Anyway, the highlighting of this is just to say, look at what the competitors are doing. They're marketing to that same audience, and is the design that you're creating in harmony with the marketing style that other people are using to reach that same audience? It's not about copying. It's about having enough similarity to the industry that you feel like you're part of it. That when somebody sees this design, they're like, oh, I get it. That feels comfortable to me, because I've also seen the ads for this company, this company, this company. You do want to have enough of a match to feel consistent with the industry, and then enough of differentiation to stand out. And that's the real balancing act that's hard to find sometimes. Yeah. How much should we look like the other people versus how much should we differentiate from the other people before we lose touch with our own target audience in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. Now, another thing to look for when critiquing design is the composition, the overall composition, and to look at it like from again, big picture here, not to look at the composition and go, the line height on that specific subheading is off. No. Like, get rid of all of that. And this is where wireframes and true boxes and lines without any sort of design is really helpful. Is, if you're creating from scratch, making sure the composition is clear, your organization to how you're composing the information or where information is going to be organized and structured. Is there anything that can improve the overall composition? Is something just off? If you're just looking at it from a big picture, standing back, almost blurring the eyes, is something off? Sometimes you're looking at a big billboard or information design and you go, something's off here. And you go like, I see what it is. Like, and then you might drill down and say, it's the spacing between these two elements, or like that picture in the back is, it's too conflicting with the main heading and I can't read it. And I have to try really hard to read it. Like, it could be something, is there something in the composition, whether it's the layout or how you're organizing something, that's just off? Is there anything that could be improved? And an obvious state. You don't have to, like, if you can't notice it right away, then probably you'll spot it in a broad stroke or the nitty gritty details. But big picture, if it fits, that's a good sign. Yeah.
There's some standard composition formulas that I remember from, I have a minor in art history because I only had to take like one extra class at my university to get minor in art history. So I did. And we were critiquing freaking art from everybody, all the Da Vinci's of the world. Not that there weren't a lot of Da Vinci's, let's be honest, but the Da Vinci's and the Monets and the Manets and the Renoirs and all of the Rembrandts of the world. You're going and critiquing all these things, and there are common composition formulas that are used. One of the most common ones is just a triangle composition, a triangle composition with 3 focal points that lead from one to the next to the next. So 3 dots. And in design, I use that all the time. I'm always thinking of these focal points creating this triangle composition. Another one that's super popular in photography and in design for people who pay attention to it, but the rule of thirds in photography, and you see this from even your phone, has the rule of thirds little grid that'll just pop onto your phone camera when you want it. That's another composition, a holistic, global, broad or big picture composition thing that we should be looking for in this section, this big picture. Is the composition working? We're looking for these kinds of tried and true composition formulas.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can overlay what you're doing. So if you're starting from scratch, you could begin with a composition and go, this is going to work. Or if you're retroactively critiquing a design, whether it's your own or clients or somebody you're working with, you could see what's the composition here. And sometimes, oftentimes, if they don't have one, you can tell, especially if like you said, you were trained in that, if you understand what are these kind of broad, or bigger picture composition ideas, a rule of thirds, a triangle, like the F pattern, just columns. It's a 2-column grid, is it a 12-column grid where everything's on a 12-column grid? So you might think, if I look at a design and it's particularly chaotic looking, if I take a quick second and I align with my eyes, even just imagine a 12-column grid, I could see this is on a grid. This is not chaotic at all. This is very intentional, and it's meant to give you that feeling of something is, it's creating a bit of tension and interesting lines, but it's not chaotic and random. It's very precise. And so knowing these compositional techniques can really help you to design, but also to critique the design and improve a design.
Yeah. Critiquing design it improves your own design because you start paying attention to the details that you should be looking at when you're designing something. So this is why I love the game of just critiquing everything everywhere I go. If I'm sitting in a restaurant or a billboard or whatever, you're critiquing the stuff because I'm fine-tuning my eye so that when I go design my next thing, I'm a more polished, more observant, more thoughtful designer.
Yep. And then it becomes more natural. So you don't have to think about it as much. You just automatically fall into that compositional technique, or you fall into that typography style, or elements and compositions and information lockups. It just becomes natural as you practice it. Now, another one would be client examples. Does the design meet or exceed the quality level of other example designs that the client has mentioned that they want or that they like, or you just know they're competitive brands? If it's an outdoor lifestyle brand or an adventure brand, like the Yeti brand, Garmin, there's lots of them, whether it's clothing or products, GoPro. Is the expectation there from other examples? Is it fitting within the landscape, or is it completely way off kilter and not in a good way? Because it's good to differentiate, of course. You don't want to be all the same, but there's expectations. If I walk into a grocery store and it feels like I'm in a mall, and it's got a weird layout and there's escalators, and I'm like, what's going on? This isn't a grocery store. The expectation is off. Whereas if I'm in a grocery store and it's refined and it's high end feeling and it feels more bougie and organic, then it's still a grocery store, but it's meant to be more sensually pleasant.
Natural foods, kind of holistic,
the Whole Foods, that
healthy
sort of stuff.
Junk,
versus just a big chain Loblaws company up here in Canada. So that's do the examples in the landscape of that market, in that industry, does it align with that? Or if you're critiquing something and the client was like, we really like this competitor, they do this really well, I love this, or I don't like this, then you can go, okay, how does your design or this specific design square up with that? Or how does it contrast with that? Are the expectations and the affordances that are in, your design, do they align with what the client examples that are out there? I think that would be an important one to note as well.
It is. It's good. A lot of times clients will say, oh, we want it to look like Apple, or we want it to look like Nike. That's what we're trying to get. Those are kind of the two most common. We want it to look like brands that I've heard over my career. So clients will say that. So when you create the design, or when you're critiquing the design and the client said something like that, we want it to look like Starbucks, or we want it to feel as high end as Starbucks design, then look at Starbucks design and compare your design and say, okay, am I reaching that level of polish that we would see in a Starbucks design, or are we missing something? Another one is just inspiration examples, Brad. So not just client examples that they mentioned, but when you prepare to design something and you're looking for your own inspiration and you're looking at other designs and you're thumbing through magazines and you're looking on Pinterest and you're just trying to swallow as much inspiration as you can to spark ideas for you, then compare your finished design to the inspiration examples that you found before you started designing, because it can help you analyze your own work and say to yourself, is this as good as the inspiration examples? No, something feels different. It doesn't feel as good. And you can rectify it before you go and send it to the client. I learned so much from looking at other people's design work, and sometimes even in the early days, taking somebody's design, and I know I'm going to have my own photos and my own copy and my own headlines, but using the exact proportions of the design that I found. So my headline type was the same size. My body copy text was the same size. My photos were different. My call to action was different. The colors were different. Everything was different. But I used the structure of inspiration examples to improve my ability to see good design in my own work and to size things right and choose the right photo focal point for my work. It helped to look at other people's stuff and even overlay your own design on top of it to improve your own craft.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, are there any more big picture items that we should look at before you take us through the broad strokes?
No, I'll take us through the broad strokes. I guess one big picture one is dimensions. Like if you're looking at a website, you're designing a website. Are you using a 1920 grid? Are you using a 12 column grid, a 6 column grid? Is this a trifold brochure? Is it a trifold on a standard 8.5 by 11 kind of piece of paper? Or is it a legal paper? What are the dimensions? And I look at that at broad stroke level. Like, is it a bifold versus a trifold? Are we even designing the right thing here for the client?
Does the design match the medium as well? You can look tablet, like the viewports, desktop, tablet, mobile, landscape view, portrait view. Does it match? Yeah. Does it work?
Yeah. Yep. Okay, well, let's talk about broad strokes. And we'll go through these broad strokes and nitty gritty a little faster because they're easier to explain. But the first broad stroke one is eye flow. This is the first thing I look at. Where does my eye go first? Where does it go next? Where does it go next? That's what I look at. When I look at a design, I'm following my eye, and am I going in the right places that the designer intentionally created for me? That's the first thing that I look at. What about you? Do you look at that stuff, Brad? Are you more hillbilly, kind of shooting from the cuff, kind of backwoods Canada style? What do you do?
I read from the bottom right to the top left. No,
smart.
No, I subconsciously just those just kind of naturally the eye flow. But if I'm trying to critique, I do try to see where do my eyes flow naturally, and is something drawing me away from that? Is something disrupting that? If I'm used to going from the top left, and there's they call it the F pattern, where a lot of the time you start from the top left and you go to the right, and then your eyes go down kind of partial, and then a little bit over, and then down. So, that top nav logo area to the hero to where a call to action might land. And then it's just linear on the left from there. It's kind of the typical eye tracking pattern. Now it's possible different cultures might look at it differently. But typically that pattern is there. So for me, it's pretty subconscious. I look at it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes subconscious after you've designed so many things. You just use these formulas and you look for this stuff without even consciously saying, okay, now I'm going to check my eye flow, and then I'm going to check my typography and whatever. It just becomes natural. But in the early days, it helps to have a list like this that you're going down and just kind of methodically checking the boxes. Yeah. One of my pet peeves on iFlow, Brad, is visual ping pong. I hate it when two items have the same visual weight and then my eye can't decide, what am I looking at? And it's just ping ponging back and forth. It drives me crazy. So make sure that you have this content hierarchy in place so that the eye flows through the design in your desired way. Yeah.
And another one is lock your colors in properly. Establish a color palette, and have your main color palette, and you might be choosing a color composition like it's monochromatic, complementary. There's different color techniques to use for color palettes. Decide on one. Pick it, establish your brand, and assign those colors to the right thing. So that will help with the weight and your composition. It'll help with what's primary, what's secondary, what's tertiary, what's ancillary information. Like that really, really helps. Lock the colors in, figure that out properly. Don't just pick random colors. I like green, and then I like green with just a little bit to the left on the color wheel. Like, don't do that. Yeah. Pick your colors, and it should just be it should be almost scientific and totally. Yeah. There's nothing creative about it after you've established your colors. You just go, this is the color for this. This is the color for this.
Primary color, secondary color, and an accent color. That's like the safest palette you can choose. Yeah. A primary, a secondary, and then something that you're just dripping in as an accent color. I think that formula. Now you can have multiple tertiary or quadratary or quintitary colors. I don't know what the ones are for those.
I'll pick up what you're putting down.
You can have multiple of those, and if you want to get a little more crazy and a little more colorful and vibrant in the design, you can do that. It becomes more complicated the more colors you use for the design. I thought this was something. I took a color theory class at university also, and I thought it was kind of mind blowing to me when I started to see that, you know, if you put a red color swatch next to a blue color swatch, it makes the blue color turn more purple because it sucks some of the red into it. But if you put yellow next to it, then all of a sudden the blue looks like a completely different color. The colors affect each other. And I also thought of this on weight too. Like you can have a little red circle on a design and a big blue circle, and visually they may have the same weight. The big blue circle is a color that recedes in prominence, and a red is a color that carries more visual weight to it. And so those two items could have the same visual weight, even though size was much bigger on one color versus the other. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that can happen with colors and weight that you do have to pay attention to in design. Yeah. Those are two of the things you should be looking at. And when you're critiquing your own work, color, weight, eye flow, that three thing is that first trifecta of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd say
the next one. Go ahead.
The next one for me, like to me, this is almost what I see first. And I have to make myself not look at this first. I have to go big picture first. But the first thing that I notice is the typography. I'm like a sucker for good typography. And I'm also deeply hurt by bad typography. You know, font choices, are they expected? Are they surprising and exciting? Are they so boring? Are they completely not what it should be? You know, the typography, I think, can make or break the site. This is my hot take. Regardless of your big picture, your typography can make or break the site entirely. And if you have your objective locked in, your big picture's all good, your eye flow, you got all the weight, and you throw in the wrong font and line heights, letter spacing, font weights, it wrecks the whole thing. It all falls apart. That's my hot take on it. You can choose the wrong font and it's done. It's toast. So that's important.
It's a big indicator of a junior designer versus a senior level designer is the sophistication in typography. Kerning the little thing, the line height just right versus too spread out or too tight. It's such a glaring problem in young designers. It was for me too. I was like, it took me a while to figure out the little nuances of making the type actually look good on a design. So I think that's a shout out to people who are maybe younger in their career or newer in their career. Polish that skill, polish up the typography skill, because it is a big indicator of whether you're a high level designer or a low level designer.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, Brad, what are some of the fonts that you can use? Okay, there are like 12 million fonts in the world. And while you're talking, I'm going to look up how many fonts there actually are. How many fonts are there? But what are some of the ones that you should use? 200,000 fonts in the world.
Holy smokes,
that
seriously?
Exist. Yeah, those are your choices.
Thought that
this other article says 300,000.
And it's probably also hard to know because there's lots of fonts that, you know, people would design themselves. You can have like independent designers creating their own fonts. So there's probably almost, you know, an endless number, but official fonts, you know, you're looking at 200,000-300,000, something like that, right?
Yeah. 200,000 to 300,000 fonts in the world. I would vote that there are maybe 20 of those 200,000 that you should actually use. And all the rest of them you shouldn't use in your design. Yeah. What are some of those? And then there's more, obviously, than just 20. But if you made a list of yourself and you're going to say, what are the top fonts that, yes, you can use without ever being embarrassed for yourself? What's one of those fonts, Brad, for you?
Inter. I-N-T-E-R. Inter.
I-N-T-E-R. Okay.
Yeah. Helvetica. Helvetica
Yes. Oh, Helvetica.
Yeah.
Helvetica Now. Did you know about Helvetica Now?
No. What?
Helvetica Now was a redesigned version of Helvetica that fixed all of the problems in Helvetica New or Helvetica Original. That's my font is Helvetica Now. I paid for the whole bundle, and I use it for everything. I'm addicted to Helvetica, but Helvetica Now is really, really a sharp font.
I love that. And I've loved Helvetica, but there have been problems that aesthetically bugged me. And it sounds like that's maybe I'm going to be not stealing it, but buying that license as well.
Some of the freaking letter spacing for some of the numbers and stuff on Helvetica just piss me off, man. I'm like, why every time I type a 0 in front of a 1, why is my 1 like 7 yards away from my 0? Like the kerning there, I always am kerning it closer. Things like that are fixed in Helvetica Now. The K, a K next to an E was one that I always feel like I was tucking my E into my K, and I feel like on Helvetica Now I'm not fixing that all the time. Those kinds of things. Okay, so for me,
Helvetica, Inter. But Helvetica Now might be a good contender. Inter's free, so that's the thing it's a free. Like if you use Inter or a system font, the system UI font that's built into your Mac or your PC, like those are really safe and good, proven choices for web projects. Yeah. As soon as you start throwing in the Lados and the Montserrats and the Robotos and Merryweathers,
Lado pissed me off.
I'm out. Like
Lato pisses me off. I feel like the weights are all over the place. Like my stem is bolder than my whatever part of the font, my curved area.
Yeah.
I freaking hate. I've tried on Lato or Lato. I've tried.
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like if I picked like 3 fonts, because you obviously have your sans serif fonts, your serif fonts. Yeah. Then you have your system-based fonts. Like for cursive fonts, system and number fonts. So you might want to show your numbers or your code different than say your text. So if I were to just choose simple, straightforward, if I could just choose 2 or 3 fonts, it's Inter or maybe even Helvetica Now. And that's a good sans serif font.
Yeah.
For a stylistic font, like a modern font, I really like the DIN, D-I-N.
Oh, I freaking love DIN.
DIN.
That was a riser font at my agency. That was our brand font for like 5 years.
That's amazing. When I worked at an agency many years ago, that was their font that they went to a lot. And it made me realize like there's some good stuff out there and you have to pay for it, but that's the best stuff, the paid for fonts and licenses. Yeah. And I like Space Grotesque for a monotype style font. Sometimes that's a cool stylistic choice. And honestly, for a serif style font, there's probably some really good ones. I don't tend to use them. But, I wish I knew it off the top of my head. There's one that I use. Give me one second.
Garamond on a serif font. Freaking Garamond is should be, that's my go-to serif, and my go-to sans serif is Helvetica. Those two, you're never going to get in trouble for using Garamond or Helvetica. Nobody's ever going to say, hey, why'd you choose that font? You can say, because it's the most popular font ever created. That can be a response. It's the most famous font ever.
Yeah.
That's the response.
Cormorant Garamond. I like that one a lot for my sans serif style. So for me, it's like I could design just with those. Now there's some really cool condensed block letter display fonts that I really like. Those are bold choices and you could go very wrong, but good designers who know typography, they do those so well. And I'm always so happy when I see that.
Yep. Let me give you a few that are on this list. I pulled up, everybody's got these. Well, not everybody, but you got like thousands of these are the only fonts you should use articles out there.
Right.
So I'm going to throw a few more logs on the fire of 20 that you should use. Futura is one. Yes, you can use Futura. Dot I thought was interesting because I've never used that ever on anything ever. But as I see it, it's good. It can work for the right thing. Garamond, obviously. Caslon is a good one. Freight Sans. I've never used Freight Sans before, but this is in this article. It's meh to me. as I look at it. Open Sans, another free font that I use.
I don't like that. Don't use it.
I know. There are problems with it. There are problems with it for sure. It's a meh, but it's a popular meh. Gil Sans, Gotham. Ooh, Gotham.
Gotham. I love Gotham.
I love Gotham. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gotham is yummy. Gotham is yummy.
Yeah. It's like
Bodoni.
rich Texas toast with like a lot of butter on it.
It is so yummy. I love it. Bodoni is another font that's Didot-esque. That's a nice serif font. Universe I saw being used 22, 23 years ago, and not so much anymore. I don't see that nearly as prevalent as some of these other ones.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was a total divergence from the but
we could just do a whole
talk
typography episode at some point. But
exactly. We could. We should talk about typography.
Yeah,
at some
let's do
point.
it.
Well, more than we just did. Okay, let's whip through some of these other broad strokes and then get into some of the nitty gritty. Another broad stroke is the photography. Are you using photography effectively in the design to help convey the right message? A picture's worth 1,000 words. You need to choose your photography carefully. Yeah. And then messaging is the next one. Messaging like your headlines, your subtext, your subheadlines. Is that being done effectively in the design? And go down to the wording. Is it makes sense? Like, read the freaking words, designers. Read the words. I know we just look at it from the design feels nice. And meanwhile, there's a typo in the 3-letter or the 3-word headline. And one of the words of the 3 is spelled wrong, but we don't notice because we don't actually read it. Start reading the freaking words and pay attention to things that can improve it. Maybe it's adding a word that's missing. Maybe it's taking away a word that's not needed, but pay attention to the words that are actually written. So those are the broad strokes.
Content is king in that, I would even recommend turning off the styles on the design and just read the page and see if it makes any sense.
Hey, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
See if it makes any sense.
It's like, is this worth anything, or are we just making crap look pretty?
Yep. All right. So after we get through big picture and then broad strokes, then we get it down into the nitty gritty. Now, the trick is to try and keep your clients from going into the nitty gritty too early. That's the challenge. And the nitty gritty are things like typos. We just mentioned it on the messaging. Is there a typo somewhere? Look at every single word, read every word, check for typos. Take the text, get rid of the design on your browser, or do a spell check. Yeah. Run a freaking spell check. If you're in InDesign or something, a word processing type of application. If you're on a website application, do a spell check on there. Make sure your auto spell checker is turned on. But even if the client made the typo, you should still fix the typo. You're the designer. It's quality control. Fix the typos. Yep. Grid. Go ahead. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, grid. I love grids. Grids. I'm a sucker for grids. Like if you can give me a black and white website with good typography on a grid, Brad's a happy guy.
It's gonna be the best design.
It's probably gonna be the best site of the year. It's gonna be it's gonna win a Webby award. It's gonna win all the awards. And honestly, I love it. So check to make sure that everything's aligned on the grid properly. You can either get a Chrome plugin, like a CSS grid plugin that overlays a grid. Those are a little bit difficult because usually if it's a good designer, there's actually an underlying grid, either in the CSS, and you could see it if you open up the dev tools, the inspector, or if you're opening it up in like Figma or whatever your design tool is. You can do it in Wix Studio. You could do what's called a grid overlay tool. It's just built right into the tool. You just turn on the grid overlay, you choose the columns, the spacing, the gutters, like all the settings, the margins, the width, how what the width is of the each column, and then you overlay it, and then you could see what's aligned on the grid, what's not. And that's, to me, another mark of a rookie designer is they failed to use a grid. And all I got to do is overlay a grid, find out what column they're attempting to use, and you could just see it. this is off by 10 pixels to the left. This convention that you've established here for your text lockups, you're only using it once here, and it's different here, and it's different here, and this is even off center, and this is not even on a grid, and your 3-column grids all have different sizes and spacings and gutters. This is total mess, and you could feel it. The average person reading the site, they have no clue, but they can feel it. It's like walking into a budget experience versus a refined experience, and you're like, I don't know what it is, but something is better. And that something is going to be those nitty-gritty details that a good designer knows how to fix. So grid and alignment, that alignment is that next piece here. Make sure your alignment, whether your text alignment literally is using the right alignment, if everything's aligned properly on the grid, your photos that you align on the grid from your content to all of it. It's so important. What else?
Yes. Good. Photo treatment is another one. Like, is there some kind of style that we should be using on the photography? Black and white? Is there a texture on it? Are we putting in some noise on these photos and stuff? That's texture. A common one that makes these photos look so much more professional. If you start paying attention to movie posters and things, like there's something like some of the best key art ever, and you look at it closely, you're going to see a lot of stylized photography in there. That post-processing, they're adding noise to things. They're adding shadow. They're adding contrast. Are you treating these photos that you're using, or are you just downloading a stock photo and downloading it in its current construction of composition and then uploading it into your site? Or are you cropping it new at least? Are you adding noise to all of the photos? Just a little smidge to give it a little more polish or a little more interest than just a standard freaking stock photo. That's what you should be doing, and you should be paying attention to that in your design. We mentioned typography before, but typography in the nitty gritty is when you start looking for those little kerning spots. You're like, ooh, we got to nudge this E over. We got to, the readability isn't so good because the text is too tight together on line height. We got to spread that out a little bit. In broad strokes, we look at typography like, what fonts are we even using here? What typefaces are we using here? And, but in nitty gritty, it's looking for those little things. And did you want to say anything about those before I tell you the last one that pisses me off so bad? Yeah,
I'll save that one for just a second here. It's the nitty gritty details in typography. Like when you're H1, let's say your H1, you set to be gigantic, and it's a stylistic choice. You want it to be huge, great, but your line height's going to be off. And you're going to start to notice the kerning between letters and the first letter, from where the first letter begins to where the margin of that text box should be. It's never butted up right against it. So you're going to see your heading. Let's just say you're looking at the word heading, and it's huge. And then the subtitle below that is a much smaller font for nice contrast and balance. But something's quite off here where that heading seems to be more indented by even just like 3 or 4 pixels. And that's just because of the size of your font. And especially if it's a web font that's maybe not a paid for font, you're going to get discrepancies that don't look right and aligned. So even though the text box, the bounding box of the text container is immediately on the same grid line as your text below or your element below, like a photograph or a container box, you're going to need to negative indent that text box by a little bit if you want that alignment to be perfect. And it's those little nitty gritty details that at first glance, big picture, doesn't matter. But when you're looking at it and going, how can I make this better and refine this even more? It's that sort of stuff. It is that.
The little stuff that some fonts drive me crazy on that. The little bit of nudging that you have to do from a headline to a subtext below it. You got to tweak it over a little. Tangents is the last one. This tangent thing pisses me off. It is that Gestalt principle of items on the design have a magnetic tension to them. And if they're too close together, then they need to be overlapping to a point where it feels intentional. These tangents are when, like you have a triangle on a design and the tip of the triangle is super close to the edge of the margin, the page. And now it's like, oh, I got to move it over farther away from the edge, or I've got to overlap the edge. Those are my two choices. But leaving it where it is that gives me visual anxiety is not an option. You have to tweak these things. So I look for tangents all the time. Man, you're going to see these all over the place when you look in on menus and stuff. I talk about critiquing menus because I love to critique menus when I'm at a restaurant. I'm like, this sucks. Why did they do that? That text or that picture is way too close to the logo right there. And I've got that anxiety magnetism happening between those two things. I got to separate them more so that you don't have that tangent, that tension that sits there between objects.
That's a good one. Oh, so fun.
It's a good one.
It is.
All right. I'm going to whip through on these just so that people have a summary here. And then we're going to wrap up today's podcast. But you have big picture first. In the big picture category, the first things we look at, objective, the action we want them to take. Does it match the brand? Does it resonate with the target audience? Is the composition appropriate or working? Does it match the client and inspiration examples? And then are the overall dimensions of the piece correct? Brad, why don't you go down the broad strokes? What are the key points on broad strokes?
Eye flow, weight, colors. Those are kind of like a trifecta, like a bit of a broad stroke trinity, if you will. And then, I mean, for me, the number one, it'd be typography. And, you know, are you using the right font choices? And that's your typography locked in. Your photos, the imagery that you're using, and the messaging. Is the core message clear? You know, is that also locked in? So those would be your broad strokes.
And then you go to nitty gritty, and that's when we're looking for typos and we're looking for grid alignment. We're looking for just alignment of objects in general. Even if you're not designing on a 12 column grid or a 3 column grid or something, are you aligning elements properly? Are the photos treated correctly for the brand? The typography, we're looking for typos and widows and orphans and rivers and all that junk inside of typography. And then we're looking for those tangents, that visual tension that we sometimes unintentionally create in a design. So that's the critiquing overview. If you look at it as these 3 buckets, big picture, broad strokes, and then to get to the nitty gritty, it will help you train your eye to be a better designer, critique other designers, and help your clients see why a design is good versus another design not being so good. You're going to be able to explain that to a client. So I hope that this conversation helped you today to get a little under the hood of what goes on in the mind of a designer when they're looking at design and designing things. You have any final thoughts for us, Brad?
I just think that have fun with it. Like when you know this and you almost have a checklist to go through, observe the world around you. You'll immediately experience this, whether it's the clothing you're wearing, to the labels on the clothing, to honestly, I'm looking at a receipt here for like a prescription, and it's very hard to read because however this information was designed, it's virtually impossible to understand, to like a professional product, to a website experience, to a document, to everything. Like it's all, design is all around you. Observe it and see if you could spot and what you can notice, you know, of the big picture, the broad strokes, nitty gritty. Just take a look at design. And when you see the world as a designed experience, which it really is, you can kind of almost have fun with that. Like Mike, you were saying earlier, I do the same thing with restaurant menus. Like my wife's like, so what do you want to get? I'm like, I wish that this column wasn't so close to this. You're like, that's not, we're here for the butter chicken, Brad. You're like, yeah, but the tikka masala, I can't read it because the whoever designed this, they didn't hire a good designer, or the designer didn't have the strength to be authoritative to go, listen, I'm the professional. Let me do it right. I could see it and I know I need to pick a meal, but I'm just really bugged by the leading. It's just not working. I
am not going to order the salmon. As a result, I'm not ordering the salmon.
Yeah, I will not recommend.
That's what they lose.
Yeah.
they lose. Yeah. It's a good exercise, and it'll help you become a better designer. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of 2 Pixels Off. We appreciate you. We appreciate Wix Studio for making 2 Pixels Off podcast possible. Check out Wix Studio at wixstudio.com, and check out Brad's community, the Creative Crew community, which is a free community for designers and web developers to build relationships, get some free training. Brad and I do group coaching inside of that community, and it's free to sign up. So check out the links below this podcast or this video, whichever you're consuming this on, and check out that community. And we will see all of you again on the next episode of 2 Pixels Off.
Cheers.